Alrighty, welcome back. Got the oil drained. There wasn't a whole lot in there, surprisingly. This thing leaked. It leaked and burned a lot of oil. So next thing we're gonna do is probably pull the head off. It's pretty straightforward. Just these bolts here. I'm gonna do that off camera, and then we'll talk about that. Okay, so we're back again. I got all the head bolts loosened up. One thing I did want to talk about real quick is you'll notice there is no tag on this engine. So when I got this engine, the person that I got it from had, he didn't really know kind of what it was. He didn't really care. He was just more into functionality. But the tag on it had a 6S, which is a Model 6 Briggs with a suction carburetor. As you can see, we have a small flow jet carburetor. So this definitely was not a 6S, nor would a 6S have the 6-to-1 gear reduction. So after looking, I forgot about this. It just kind of popped into my head a minute ago. But on the back side of these flywheels, there's usually a number cast. Like right here, there's a 55. 55 is what I make it out. Didn't really see any others. That's usually the year it was made. Usually there's a year and a month code. Another one's over here. This is off of another 6S, or not a 6S, but a NR6 Briggs. And it has a C and a 48 right there. So this is a 1948 engine that this guy came off of, which is that one back there. It came from the scrapyard. So this is a 1955, so I can probably safely say this is a Model NR, or not N, but a 6R6 Briggs. Really the only other way to tell is when we measure the bore. If it's a, I believe, 2-inch or 2 1/8 was the next size up, which would have made it an 8 cubic inch displacement. Anyways, enough about that. So the head comes off. Make sure all your bolts are loose. Don't lose these. If you're into originality, they say Rockford on them. It's kind of cool looking. Anyways, that guy comes off. And then your head gasket, which is hanging out right there, old kind of cruddy. That is an original Champion plug, by the way. I like old stuff. But anyways, head gasket. I like to hang on to them. They can be kind of handy. You can reuse them. Probably shouldn't, as they are available today. Pretty common. But just kind of depends. Good wall hanger in case of emergency. So as we can see, pretty small. There isn't really much of a ridge at the top of the cylinder, which is surprising for as much oil as this stupid thing burned. Can also see here intake valve and then exhaust valve. The exhaust valve got quite a bit of carbon on it, probably from burning all that oil. So I don't know what the pits are in the top of the piston. I don't really know why those are there. But like I say, I don't know the history of this engine. It could have sucked something up in there and somebody pulled it over. I don't really know. Could be a lot of things. Probably just an answer that's left and lost to time in general. Pulling these head bolts out, we'll look at the top of the combustion chamber here, if I can get them to come out. It's pretty clean in there. You can see some marks where the carbon has been scraped off. Funny thing, that N in the corner is actually the model of head that this fits. So a Model N, which became the 6 once Briggs and Stratton went to that when they changed their model designations. So this will fit in either Model N or a Model 6 Briggs engine, and possibly an 8. Don't quote me on that though. So anyways, probably the next thing is let's get these valves out. I'm gonna do that off camera and then I'll explain how I did it. Okay, quick little shot here. This guy. This is the crankcase breather. You have a spring, and then a cap, and a piece of phenolic. It'll come out. It fell out a minute ago. And then there's a gasket here and 2 little prongs. This guy acts as a check valve for any gases that might have escaped into the crankcase of the engine. He sits right in here over that hole, and then the spring puts tension on this guy, which is the stud that sticks out, which holds on your cover for your valve body. And there's a gasket and then a cover. I've seen a couple different variations of these. Some of them have this, like this. Some of them are just cut off and rounded. So far, that's the only two I've really seen. Doesn't mean there aren't more out there. There's a washer, a lock washer, and a nut that holds that cover on. Next thing, and this is where it gets fun. On these Briggs engines, there's actually a pin that holds the valves in. And this is a two-handed thing to get these out. But anyways, there's a pin that runs crossways through here, through the valve stem, and it keeps the tension on the spring so that it will close nicely. Kind of a complicated pain in the butt to get out of there and put back in, but when you're working on these, you just kind of have to deal with a lot of things like that. There's just some things that you can't change. So let me get these pulled and then we'll come back and talk. Okay, don't know if you can see this very well, but you can see the hole in the valve stem, and I've got the screwdriver holding the spring up. In the back, there's a little pin. To get these out, I like to cheat, and I take a piece of welding wire here and push the pin through all the way through, and it pops it in the back. Now, if you're just doing a valve grind on these, you obviously want to keep track of that pin. Don't let it fall through a little hole there. Otherwise, in this case, it fell in, so what? We're going to be in the crankcase in a minute anyways, so we can get the pin back. Otherwise, you got to pull the sump off, and it's a whole nother mess. So let me get the exhaust one out, and we'll come back. Okay, so I got the pins out. The exhaust, or the springs are just sitting there against their own pressure, and then you can just lift these out. When you pry them up with a screwdriver, sometimes you have to tap on them pretty good to get them to drop back down in. Just depends. Just kind of a quick glance at the seat, or at the face of the valve. It looks pretty clean. If I'm not mistaken, I can't remember. I think this spring I had these out and I lapped them in a little bit to help them seal. Wow. I cleaned this up pretty good, I thought. Maybe I didn't get into this one, but she's got a lot of oil and a lot of garbage on it. So she's been burning a lot of stuff. We'll measure these and measure the guides, make sure that everything jives. If not, we got the spare block in the back here. We got options. So anyways, next thing is to get the springs out. You need those pliers. This is a great use. Just kind of have to wiggle them and get them out, and then I drop the retainer. So anyways, this is what the spring retainer looks like, just a piece of stamped steel. Your intake spring, and then your exhaust spring. And it looks like I might have got these mixed up when I put this back in, because usually, if I'm not mistaken, the lighter spring goes on the intake side. So that probably could have been part of the contribution to some of the problems here. Like I say, the engine did run good for the most part. She just burned a lot of oil. Yeah, so if you look, you can see the difference between the springs. The lighter spring here versus the heavier. This is the exhaust side. I must have put them in backwards. I was in a bit of a hurry this spring when I did this. I put this whole thing together in a couple of nights, and I was in a rush to get out in the field and get back to work, so my bad. But anyways, so that takes care of that. Next thing we're going to tackle is let's get the gear reduction off. I'm going to get that taken off camera here, and then we'll come back and talk.